everyone, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to a collaboration video that I am doing in partnership with Kathy from Kathy Trithardt. She is a wonderful, wonderful booktuber here on YouTube and she has been doing these collaborations with friends of hers where she asks 5 bookish questions and they answer them, and then they ask her 5 bookish questions in return. So I was really excited when she said she was willing to do this with me as well, because it's just such a fun concept. So I'm really excited to see what Kathy's questions are. I have not watched them yet. I do not know what she's asking me. Over on her channel, she's going to be answering 5 bookish questions that I have asked her. I will leave that linked down below, but let's dive into this video.
Hi Steph's channel, Novelty Corner. I'm Kathy from the channel Kathy Trithardt, and I'm here to ask Steph 5 bookish questions. I never think of my questions ahead of time, I just sit down and film them, so this is going to be a surprise to me as much as it is to you. My first question is, do you ever read books outside, and if so, what is your favorite book that you have read outdoors?
I actually have to think back a while, and this is probably from a few years ago, but I read the majority of Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang, the spec fic short story anthology that he wrote. I actually read that outside, but I didn't read it in my balcony. I actually read it on the rooftop of my building. There's a really lovely communal rooftop space up there. It was the school holidays and I spent a good hour and a half sort of reading the first 3 or 4 short stories from that anthology up on the rooftop because it was nice and sunny, but it wasn't too hot, and it was just really nice being 8 stories up and having no one else around and being able to sit outside and enjoy time reading up there.
My second question has to do with nerdy reads. I absolutely adore nerdy reads. Things that have to do with fandoms are just so interesting to me, even if I'm not a person in that specific fandom. So please tell me about something that is a nerdy fandom read that you enjoyed.
Okay, so a nerdy read, I'm going to be quite literal in my response to this one because I tend to read a lot in Marvel and DC universes, so I tend to read a lot of those graphic novels, particularly Batman or Batgirl or Birds of Prey related stuff in DC or X-Men in Marvel. And I also read a lot of Star Wars books. So I'm going to be very, very literal in how I interpret this. A bit of backstory. When I was working in my first job, one of the people that I worked with was a big Star Wars fan and read a lot of the books and had a lot of them. So he lent me, at first it was the X-Wing series, and then he also lent me the New Jedi Order books. So they're all part of, I think, what's now considered the legendary canon of books. So they're not technically canon anymore. So I got started reading all of those and I spent many, many years, like we're talking 20 years ago now that I was reading all of these books. And I started collecting the books in those series. And then obviously in the last 5-10 years, they've rebooted the book series and the canon. And I've had varying success with those books. But one that I've read probably in the last year and a half that I really enjoyed was the anthology Star Wars from a Certain Point of View. And this was the book that was celebrating 40 years of the original first film. And I read this with the audio because the audiobook was fantastic. It had lots and lots of different narrators for the different stories. And along with the narrators, they had special effects and it was really fun. So all in all, there are 40 short stories in here and they all take one aspect of the first film and they follow it up. It could be just like a side character or a setting or something, and they expand on that world, and I loved it. But what makes it even nerdier, so I tabbed it up because that's what I tend to do with the books that I love. But this was also the first book that as I was listening to, I was scribbling in notes and doing all sorts of things because it was just a reminder of something from my childhood. Like I watched Star Wars as a child, my parents introduced me to it. It's just so nostalgic for me, and I'm a little nerdy geek when it comes to Star Wars.
Something I've noticed on your channel that probably everybody notices is you read a lot. Like, I love your weekly wrap-ups because you have read so many things. So my question comes down to, do you feel a really big pressure to read as much as possible every week? Because I know I do.
I don't know if I'd say it's a big pressure, and it's certainly not coming from the people that I interact with on my channel at all. I'm notorious for putting a lot of pressure on myself. So when there is pressure, I think that's entirely self-inflicted on my part because I tend to get into a mindset that I have to get things done. But I'm also someone who thrives on having targets and things like that. And while I don't say every month I'm going to set out to read X number of books or I'm going to try and read 9 books in a week, in my head I want to try and get as much reading done as I can because I love reading and I love stories, and there's so many things that I want to read, and there's only a finite amount of time to do it. I also have weeks where I don't read as much, and I really try not to put pressure on myself in those weeks. I try to just recognize where I am and what headspace I'm in. So I think it's entirely more a self-inflicted kind of pressure, but it's also not one that I find detrimental to me. So I think a big part of it is just knowing myself and knowing what I can read and what I can get through in a week, and knowing when to give myself a break. So hopefully that answers the question. It's a bit long-winded, I apologize.
What 3 genres could you personally do without ever reading again, or reading for the first time if you've never read an example of them?
Okay, so it took a little while to think of these 3 genres, and that's not to say that I will never read them again, because chances are I probably will. Probably with the exception of the first one. I'm quite happy to say that classics are out, because I have had notoriously terrible luck with them. Not every book, but just consistently they're not things that I sit down and find myself really excited to read. Another genre that I definitely don't reach for, I do occasionally receive books and I'll read them then, because most people who follow my channel will know that I'm willing to give anything a shot, but literary fiction is definitely not really my thing, and I don't reach for it very often, and when I do, I don't necessarily always rate it highly. I try to be a little bit more objective when I'm reading lit fic and try to look at it from the intent of the book. But generally speaking, personally, I don't reach for them or rate them very highly myself. And the last genre, this one's kind of weird. It's something that I've read a few books of recently, which probably brings it to mind, is dystopian. It's not to say I will never read it again, but it's definitely not something I'd reach for myself. If people ask me to read it or recommend it to me or challenge me to read it, I will. Yeah, it's not something I tend to reach for myself. It is not really my subset genre, really. I find dystopians harder to get through, and I generally don't rate them very highly. Not because they're not well written. Quite often they are really well written books, but just in the terms of how I've engaged with it, I don't rate it as highly.
And down to the last question, I'm going to throw out what is now becoming a tradition, where I'm going to throw out just a few different aspects of a book and see if you can come up with a book that has all of the aspects in it. So can you tell me a book that has an aspect of comfort, an adventure, a companion, preferably like a pet type of situation, and miscommunication?
Okay, so the 4 key features: comfort, adventure, companion / pet, and miscommunication. Now, I'm actually really lucky that I'm filming this when I'm filming it, because I actually read a book that fits this description last night. It's actually kind of perfect. I'm interpreting the prompts in sort of my own way here, but the book I'm going to go for is The 10,000 Daughters of January by Alexei Harrow. Now, the way that this fits, for comfort, this is exactly my type of comfort read, because it is all about books and a love of stories and how stories can transport you to places, and this belief in the power of story. So that's the comfort level. It is an adventure story, because the main character, January, does travel through different places. She is also on a journey to find her father, and there are lots and lots of different things that happen along the way. She has a dog called Sinbad, or Bad, and he is absolutely wonderful. But I will say, spoilers, things do happen to the dog in the story. There are some quite dark elements to the story, so just be aware of that going into it. But Sinbad was just a wonderful companion for January, and I adored them together. And finally, for miscommunication, January and her father are kind of estranged in this story, in that he hasn't spent a lot of time with her because something happened in their past and something happened to her mother. And her father doesn't really talk about it. He also doesn't talk about where they're from and their past. And it's that miscommunication that sort of sets the direction for January's life for many, many years. And then when things start to go wrong, she has to relearn her history in a very different way. And her father's not there to tell her about that. So there's this thread of family miscommunication as well.
Thank you very much for doing this collaboration with me. I always love these videos because they're such a fun format to play with, and I can't wait to see what questions you've sent me and how you answer my questions. Bye.
So thank you very much to Kathy for her questions. So it was really fun to think about the answers for them and to try and put this together in some sort of cohesive way. I really can't wait to see what Kathy's answers are to my questions. So I will leave a link to Kathy's channel down below, as well as a direct link to her answers to my questions and the links to her previous collaborations for 5 bookish questions as well. In the comments below, you are welcome to leave your responses to any of the questions that Kathy left me. I would love to know your answers to them as well. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.